Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody, the podcast where we talk with people behind the top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I am your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today I'm really excited to have two wonderful guests on. It is Julie Voss, who is the VP of Development for the Texas Heart Institute, and Kelli Kickerillo, who is going to be co-chairing one of their upcoming signature fundraising events, which is their Supper Club celebration. So Texas Heart Institute is one of the most beloved and most popular institutions in the state and one of the top medical destinations for people, not just in Texas, but all over. And, we're so excited to have both of them on here to share about the organization and about the event and how they do such a good job engaging donors. And this episode is going to be a little different in that the Supper Club celebration is returning after a hiatus, and not just a COVID hiatus. It's been a few years since they've actually done this event. So we're going to be talking about those things and how you reignite an event that, was really popular and bring it back with some really renewed fervor and fun. So with that, Julie, Kelli, welcome. And I'm so excited to have you both on as guests today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, we're very excited.
Fabulous. And I'm ready to get started. So, Julie, I'm going to direct the first question to you. Can you tell me a little bit about what the mission of the Texas Heart Institute is?
Sure. Yeah. So our mission is to improve cardiovascular health through trailblazing research, thought leadership, education, and patient care.
That's fantastic. And you all have been around, if I'm not mistaken, you've all been around you just celebrated your 60th anniversary last year, correct?
We did.
That's really amazing. Tell me a little bit about that and what it's like to, be a part of an organization that's been around for that long.
For me, it's very exciting. And as a development professional, I love being part of it. I think the history is so rich, and our founder, Dr. Denton Cooley, is world renowned in cardiovascular surgery and care. And to have those kind of historic firsts, we did the first heart transplant in the United States. We've had all of these firsts. And so now to be part of what we like to call them our next firsts in cardiovascular care, because we're always coming up with something new. So I love bringing the history into what we're doing today.
That's really amazing. And it's fascinating because 60 years ago, heart transplants were almost kind of this science fiction sort of thing. And for it to actually be a thing now that is a medical procedure that, people can live, and not only live, but some of them can lead really thriving lives afterward, really just goes to show why institutions such as yours are so important in really sustaining not just life, but quality of life as well.
Yeah. And I actually, when you look back at our history, and it was all about surgery and transplants, and now we do our best to avoid surgery and transplants with a lot of, different kind of endovascular procedures, and trying to make it where people are in and out of the clinic and don't even have to be hospitalized if we can avoid it.
Wow. So that probably has to go far beyond anything Dr. Cooley could have ever envisioned in the early 60s.
No, most definitely.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. And, I want to direct the next question to Kelli, and this kind of will dovetail off of that a little bit. And that's just, how did you initially get involved with the Texas Heart Institute?
So as a family, we got involved as far back as 40 years ago. My father is in his 90s, and fortunately, he and my mother, he's Vincent Kickerillo, and my mother, Mary Kickerillo, along with my husband, Todd Forrester, are chairing this event with me. And my dad met Dr. Cooley over 40 years ago and became a patient of his, a friend and a patient of his. So he knew of the Texas Heart Institute that many years ago. And then over the years, needing care and needing an incredible cardiovascular team for our family, my father, my mother, myself, and my husband are all patients.
Wow, that's really cool to hear. And, I want to touch on something because I think it's awesome that, your parents are also, serving as co-chairs. What is a piece of advice you would give to somebody who, wants to get their children engaged in, in a nonprofit or in an organization, so that really it becomes kind of a family, almost a unifying force for a family.
Right. It's such modeled behavior for our family. My parents have always been incredibly philanthropic. They have been incredibly supportive of organizations close to their heart. And I just saw that was how they live their lives. And it was a part, we are very fortunate in our lives in business. We're successful in our business in the Houston community. And part of that is giving back to the Houston community. And we are so focused on giving back to medical foundations as well as educational foundations. And, Texas Heart Institute fills both of those bills. But truly, it was from seeing the behavior modeled from my parents. And it's just something that I couldn't go day to day without giving back to the community in some way. And I'm hoping to model that for my son.
It's wonderful. And that's, the one thing with anytime someone moves to a city, and, as we all know, as you all are from Houston, I'm from Austin, a lot of people are migrating into Texas. And, a common question that I always get is, what should I do? And my first thing is, because Texas is so philanthropic, and Kelli, you're in many ways the perfect example of the Texas spirit, in that you saw your parents give back. And, it is in Texas, I like to say that the social scene is the philanthropic scene. They're very, very intertwined, and that is a way to get involved. And it really warms my heart to hear that your parents instilled that, and that you're instilling that in your son, and really carrying and paying that forward. I think that's fantastic.
No, it's very important to us. And it's also, you're right about the philanthropic scene being the social scene of Houston, but also people in Houston are incredible, and they really have passion for these organizations, and it shows if you don't. And so we're really, really fortunate to be Texans and experiencing this.
Well, and it's because of, folks like yourself that Houston really it's a world-class city on so many fronts, but it especially is on a medical front. I mean, some of the foremost, most cutting edge medical, research centers, institutions are located there, not just with heart, but there's also MD Anderson, there's Memorial Hermann. I mean, there's lots of different wonderful organizations doing all sorts of things. So it's fantastic and really great to hear all that.
It is. We are so lucky to be in Houston, and we especially are lucky to be in Houston, in Texas, because even these hospitals you mentioned, they're opening branches all over Texas. So hopefully that may end up being the future of Texas Heart too.
I love that you all are kind of branching out and expanding. And Julie, I'd love to hear how you initially got involved with the organization, and if you're able to, and if not, I totally understand. But if you're able to, talk about how expansion kind of beyond one community into other communities really helps impact and also drive new initiatives within the organization.
Yeah. Like Kelli, I am a native Houstonian, so I have been, aware of the Texas Heart Institute forever. I actually, early on in my career, I worked for the American Heart Association and had the opportunity to meet both Dr. Cooley, who was our founder, and Dr. DeBakey, who was kind of his frenemy counterpart at another institution. And so when when the chance came up for me to be able to get involved and work for the Texas Heart Institute, I jumped at it. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's a tremendous organization. And I think, Kelli kind of just said it all. We have these donors who are older and who are really, knew Dr. Cooley and are his contemporaries, but now their children and even their grandchildren are getting involved. And it really shows, we're not the same organization we were, and we're no longer looking. We used to say it was the devastating toll of cardiovascular disease. And now we talk about cardiovascular health because, it's what can we do to prevent it?
And it's amazing. And there's even like other medical things, unrelated to you all. Like we had the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation on, a few months few months ago, and it's the same thing like with type 1 diabetes. It is just amazing the progress and how things around all sorts of medical issues have been able to evolve, that it becomes kind of this, it's as much caring as it is, curing. So it's, some preventative elements along with, some, procedural elements that go along with that.
Totally agree.
Absolutely. So, and if you're not able to answer this, we totally understand. But, I want to touch upon what Kelli was talking about, looking and kind of envisioning, THI in multiple markets, talk about how an organization gets to that point and how, what are some good steps that they can take when they're looking to, thinking about expanding into other markets.
Yeah. And in full disclosure, we are not there yet. I think that you have to have a really solid base. We have expanded, even though a lot of people don't know this. Early on, Dr. Cooley gave our clinical charter to St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital, who has been our partner, for these entire 60 years. And it wasn't until just a few years before COVID that we actually got that charter back. We started our own clinical practice. So now we have employed physicians as well as affiliated physicians. And then, and we're still affiliated with what is now Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center. So we're not a hospital where people come in. We provide all of the physician and all of the expertise in cardiac care to Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center. But how that has expanded is Common Spirit, which is a national organization. They are joint owners of Baylor St. Luke's, and our physicians serve in leadership roles with that health system. So we take our expertise and our knowledge from the Texas Heart Institute and share it nationally through their leaders and through their different institutions. And then additionally, just what we do in research, we collaborate a lot with the universities of, really in Texas, especially, but University of Texas, we have a lot going on with their engineering department, because when you think about it, a lot of these devices are based in engineering and, biomedical science. Texas A&M, the University of Houston just opened a new medical school, and we're working with their students, and they're rotating through our clinic and working with our physicians. So, we've always been what I like to call Switzerland. And so even though we're still just based here in Houston, we try to expand our expertise across the state and across the nation.
Well, and what I love about what you shared is, it's funny that you say as an organization, you're not there yet, but yet you were talking about how you're, partnering with UT, which is in Austin, and also with things outside, outside of it. And, there were two really interesting things. One is, any nonprofit is going to be successful through collaboration, and it may not even be with the ones that are the most obvious. And that's what I love about your answer. I would have never thought, oh, I'm going to partner with the UT Engineering School, but when you explain it, it makes total and complete sense as to why that would be the case. So, for anyone listening, don't just be stuck within your lane. I can only collaborate with people in this lane. As Julie just said, the sky's really the limit with how you can collaborate and really propel your organization forward. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. And just, because this is about fundraising, I would also add that it allows you to look at different donor populations as well. People who maybe they haven't traditionally given to healthcare, but they have a very vested, interest in research or in education. It's looking at it from that standpoint.
And it's really important that you bring that up, because it's, I will say the one thing I always love when I go to an event is when I see someone who is primarily fundraising in one lane, or, a major donor or philanthropist, and they show up at something in another lane. And it's all because a good development organization, which THI has, they're doing the research on that and they understand, people are not one dimensional. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, this person only gives in this genre. And people are three-dimensional people and they get affected by multiple different types of things. But you can only do that if you do research and ask the questions.
Yeah, great point.
I love that you brought that up. So, and speaking of, I know we were talking about, we're here to talk about your all's event. So this question I'm gonna direct to Kelli, and talk a little bit about, let's start with, what's it like to chair an event with your parents, and kind of, how do you create synergies with someone really, really, really well? Because a lot of times people will co-chair things and they're good friends, but they're not family. So I love to kind of get your thoughts on that.
No, it's wonderful actually sharing things with my parents. They are so incredibly forgiving and allowing me to kind of take the lead a little bit. I think you would say, Julie, in this. And they've done this many times in their long lives. They were very active in the social and philanthropic scene in Houston in the 80s, in the wild 80s, and when there was an event every night of the week. And so this is very old hat for them. And so they know when to step in and say something or make a suggestion about a timeline of an event, or who we should maybe reach out to about, who may be a good sponsor. But I've been very fortunate that they've let Todd and I kind of take the lead with this event, while being the wise people that they are, and chipping in their 2 cents when they need to. But it's been wonderful. And we've chaired events in the past, with friends and with people who are just close to an organization, but it is really special to be able to do this with my parents, because we're all patients, and Texas Heart and it's such a terrible pun, but it's so very close to our hearts.
Yeah. And well, not a terrible pun, a very accurate pun. But I love that, that only happened, it sounds like because you communicated with your parents and you said, what, we're going to take the lead, we'll bounce ideas off of you, when you can, or when you need to. And, that, one, it empowers you, but two, it also, you can draw from their experience, and they're not wanting to take over. Because, I've seen organizations where, someone will not necessarily stay at the party too long, but they really want it to be their vision. So I love that your parents have the foresight to allow you and your husband to shine on your own and take what they've taught you and put your own spin on it.
They've been incredible. And really this for the supper club and bringing this event to back to the community, we bridge the gap. We bridged the gap between my parents' generation and our generation. And it's just been really a great working experience planning this. We're excited.
Fantastic. And, Kelli just brought up something which leads me to my next question, which is for Julie, and that is, bringing an event back. So what made Texas Heart Institute decide now was the time to bring the Supper Club event back?
Yeah, so 7 years ago, our event, it actually wasn't called the Supper Club, but it was a similar kind of format. It was a leadership award dinner that Dr. Cooley always participated in and gave an award. And so our last event was in February of 2016, and then Dr. Cooley died later that year. And then Dr. Jim Willerson, who had been our president and CEO, actually died in 2020. And so both of those men were very, they were big anchors for THI. And then you kind of roll in there Hurricane Harvey, which, really set the whole Houston community back and changed focus. And then you have a pandemic. So it just, every time we think, oh, it's time, there would be something else that, was like, maybe this isn't the exact right time. So we, during the pandemic, we actually hired a new president and CEO, Dr. Joe Rogers, who is new to Texas. And so we just decided now, we just celebrated 60 years. We didn't even feel like we were quite ready last year on our 60th anniversary. even though in full disclosure, I think some of our board members would have loved for us to do this then. We just
I'm sure they
didn't.
would.
It takes a long time to plan an event. And if you're bringing something back, you want it to be incredible. I mean, this is kind of the Texas Heart Institute's entree back into Houston social scene, and it needs to be done right. So, we felt like we finally have all of the things set. And then when Kelli and Todd and her parents agreed to chair it, we were like, yes, this was exactly, what we needed to know that the timing is right. And it's time to do this.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the whole thing about timing, because I think sometimes people feel that they have to be on that hamster wheel. And, when you have a confluence of events, and that was really, because I remember 2017 in Houston, that fall was a really rough time just in Houston broadly,
Right.
but also in the social scene as well. That, and you even had stuff before that, with Dr. Cooley passing away, that you all realized that you wanted to do it and you wanted to do it right. And as much as you may have been tempted, or like you said, the board members may have been tempted, you wanted to make sure that everything aligned. And, when you reach out to people like Kelli and her husband, as well as Kelli's parents, and you found the right mix, and it's like, we know we can press go again, and we know that this can be amazing and fantastic. And, we just go forward from there. And, I want to talk a little bit about the supper club theme. And this question, I'll start with Kelli, but Julie, I'd love your input as well. But, how does having a fun theme like a supper club help engage prospective donors? And if you wouldn't mind, for anyone who's not familiar with the term, elaborate a little bit on like what a supper club is and what that means.
Right. So we thought it was a fantastic theme. It actually came from Texas Heart's development department, which is so key to have a strong development department. And this idea kind of came about, and we wanted to have that throwback idea, that throwback feel of these old supper clubs of the 1950s and 60s, the Empire Room, the Emerald Room, the Copacabana. Even in Houston, there were amazing places like the Rivoli and Rudy's, and we wanted to have that cozy feel, that incredible camaraderie with drinks flowing and incredible food and a wonderful show at the end. So that's kind of the feel of the event and kind of where it came from. And I think it's going to be an incredible night.
That's fantastic. And, Julie, from a donor perspective, how does one, congratulations on coming up. That's a really inventive and fun theme. And I'd love to hear a little bit more on, how you all came to that as a theme, but also how a theme that is really fun and you're coming back with impact with something that's fun, it's unique. I've been doing this a really long time, and I can't remember the last time this was a theme for an event really anywhere in Texas. So, how does that help engage prospective donors and bring them back in?
Yeah, well, I think, as we've talked about, there are so many events, and it really is part of the Houston social scene in what we're doing, for nonprofit. And our board, knowing that in the past, it was this leadership dinner where we gave an award and there were some more speeches, they didn't want to go to a full-on like gala, let's just have a party. And we really wanted to, again, try to bridge that gap of what historically THI had done and where we were going. And the supper club theme just kind of worked because it's it's different. We didn't want to just be the same, go out and have a party. So the Post Oak Hotel will be transformed more into this supper club, little lights on the tables. And I'm sure you remember, and I have pictures from my grandmother where she's at these supper clubs in Houston, sitting around the table listening to entertainment. So we kind of came up with that. And then I think it's just in Houston where you have so many things, what sets you apart or what can make you unique? And, so many people do the Texas theme, or so many people do, just a beautiful, very formal gala. We have a lot of arts organizations here. So we were trying to just find something that set us apart a little bit, and that would also be appealing not only to Kelli and Todd and their friends, but to Kelli's parents and their friends. You're not going to have 80 and 90-year-olds coming to some big throwdown giant party. They're not going to do it. So it worked out perfect, I think.
And blending all those ages, absolutely. And, the one thing that I've noticed just throughout this conversation is there's definitely a synergy between you all. And, I'd love for each of you to share, what is a key to having a good relationship between, the event chairs and the event committee and an organization.
Well, I would love to jump in here because Todd and I have chaired events in the past. I've chaired events in the past. And my key is finding an organization, if they come to us asking for our help, is to make sure that there's an incredible development department. It is so important. And Texas Heart has one of the best in the city, if not the best in the city, because communication between that department and the chairs is key, but also they know who their donor base is. They know who they want to raise funds from, who they want to raise awareness to. And I don't. I know my small portion of it and why I'm attracted to the organization, but they need to really steer the ship. And as a chair, you have to be willing to let them do that, but also offer, your suggestions in the feel and look of an event. And of course, offering up your contacts, which we do. We all know that when we're chairing events. And we're so thrilled that so many of our friends are going to be at this event and learn about Texas Heart because they don't know about the organization yet. But it's the development department is key.
Fantastic. And, from a development perspective, Julie, what do you think is the key to finding the right chairs that help create that good synergy between an organization and, the event chairs and committee?
Yeah. I think passion for the organization is key. And I've worked with chairs before at different organizations that were just kind of, someone knew them and they agreed to do it. But it's very different when you have a chair that is passionate about the cause and the organization. And then I think the other thing, like Kelli said, is communication, because some chairs want to be very involved, others don't have time and want to lend their name. And it's really from the get-go kind of saying, okay, this is what we need. And does this fit with what you can provide, and just being open about that from the beginning.
I love that. And I love your answers complemented each other really, really well. So I can see why you all work so well together. Kelli, I love that you brought up a phrase that I want to repeat to people. And it's, especially if someone's working for a nonprofit who's listening, you said something along the lines of how, can you help us with this event, as opposed to please do this for us. You're asking, an organization, because an organization is asking someone when they're chairing for their time. And I think it's really, it was a really important thing that you brought up with that. And everything that Julie said is, she said, she's worked with all different types of chairs, and, help is different things. Help can be, like Julie said, it can be lending someone's name, but
Right.
Help is also someone who's really passionate, who's really going to drive a really interesting mix of people there. So I really love how your answers really intertwine so nicely.
Well, thank you. And I think it is a testament to a great development department and how incredible Julie is with her team. But also, I'm not going to say yes to everything. It's not smart to. In different times in different people's lives, you want to say yes to things for many different reasons. But at this stage in my life and in our family's lives, time is precious. And when I commit to an event or to an organization, we really commit as a family, and everyone's involved. And so it has to really be worth it for us. And Texas Heart is just, there is no other organization we would do this for this year.
That's fantastic. And, while we're on that subject, let's talk a little bit about what can people expect at Supper Club this year. And I'd love for both of you to have, give whatever input or whatever you want to talk about. And I'll let you all decide, which one wants to answer that question
Well,
first.
fun night, of course, a fun night that truly you feel like you've kind of stepped back in time, a little bit into that 50s and 60s loungy club scene where you're going to get a great meal in this beautiful space that the Post Oak is here in Houston, and with the incredible event design that we have. And we are just going to have the best time listening to Pink Martini. But we have to remember that we are there for a cause, and we are there for Texas Heart and to learn about Texas Heart Institute. And so we will have features, some of our doctors and listen to me, I've already adopted the organization, but our doctors and patients, past patients, and we're featuring an incredible woman, Teresa Blades, who will tell her story and how Texas Heart has changed her life and saved her life this year. So it's just hopefully an informative but fun event.
That sounds amazing. And what I love is, because of, honoring the supper clubs of the 50s and 60s, you're honoring the history of the organization in a really unique and a really fun way, because basically, the organization was founded in the early 60s, which was prime time, for Supper Club. And Julie, I'd love to ask you a question, because, Kelli had mentioned, you have world-renowned band Pink Martini that's going to, perform. And if you have not heard them, go to YouTube, go on their Instagram, go on their TikTok. They're really one of the very, very best in the world at what they do. So I'd love you to just share, what advice would you give to someone looking to engage a high-profile act or a celebrity for their nonprofit event?
Yeah, first and foremost, hands down, work through a professional event planner. I mean, when any of these folks that you would engage, there's contracts, there's writers, it's not just, oh, this is how much the band charges, but, it's, okay, they need soap and a washcloth in the green room. Like, where are we getting, and so I don't think Kelli or I want to deal with those little kind of side items and making sure they can even happen. So, so using a professional event planner, this is what they do all the time. So they're very familiar. They go through, they help kind of screen through. We looked at a couple of bands in addition to Pink Martini, and fortunately, Kelli and her family are, have a long history with entertainment and music, and so we had a lot of great options, but some of them, one of them ended up being very cost prohibitive by the time all of the writer and everything was coming in. And Pink Martini, we happened to catch in between. They're wrapping up their US tour, and they're heading to Europe, so it worked, but it wasn't without a lot of negotiation and talking through what that looks like for the night of the event.
I love how you explain that. And of all the guests I've had, you most perfectly have just articulated all that goes into that and all the details and those specific things that celebrities or acts will ask for. They cost the organization money. And, there may be, I want this guest, but, does having that guest, does it wind up happening almost to the detriment of the organization? Meaning, there is a point of diminishing returns. And I love that you acknowledge that, that can be the case. And also, it was also in the stars from a timing perspective with Pink Martini that, they're finishing a tour in the US, and you got them in that little window where they're going overseas. So it kind of allows them to jam and, kind of stay in practice and stay, they may not be in mid-season sporting shape, but they're certainly, in the postseason workouts, and they keep, they're keeping their energy going. So I love how you just explained all that and the importance of, just making sure that you're working with a professional who can do all those things, because there's also the financial tax, but there's also the personal tax and the personnel tax of having to deal with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I would just add that, I know a lot of organizations think hiring an event planner is an extra expense that they don't need. But I would say that the things that any professional event planner can help you with will save, they're worth their weight in gold. I mean, the ROI is amazing because they know how to do things more efficiently and how to work through things. So, from a development perspective, I always really highly recommend that you get a professional event planner that can help your team, even when you have a full team of special event folks.
Fantastic. And, we're wrapping up on our time here, but I'd love for each of you just in a sentence to just ask, because you both have such wide, broad backgrounds with events, what is one thing all successful events have in common? And Kelly, I'd love to start with you on that because you've chaired things.
Me first. I just think that if you're going to chair an event, you have to have a passion for the cause. Otherwise, people see through that and they see why there may be other reasons you're chairing something. And really, and I know you wanted one thing, but the other thing is really know that you've got a strong development department there, because if not, what you thought your time commitment was going to be will be tripled, if not quadrupled, if you don't have a great development department.
And I've seen that in action, so I'm really glad that you brought that second one up. And then Julie, what do you think all successful fundraising events have in common?
Yeah, I mean, I think hands down, a passionate chair and someone that is your partner, from a development perspective, whatever that looks like, whether it's that they're super involved or not, that there's a partnership together. So I think we couldn't have asked for anything better with Kelli and Todd and her parents.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Kelli, Julie, it really has just been an absolute pleasure, having you both on. And, I hope we can have you on again with next year's event, if it's not Supper Club, hopefully as, with something else.
Well, no, we'd love to.
Hopefully Supper Club sticks and it's a branded event.
I'm pretty sure it will. I got to imagine with Pink Martini there, it will be a hit. So congratulations already. I'm not, I've got my fingers crossed saying that because I don't want to jinx anything for you, but I know it will be an amazing event. So, with that, Supper Club 2023 benefiting the Texas Heart Institute will be on September 22nd, 2023 at the Post Oak Hotel in Houston, Texas. For more information, please visit texasheart.org. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.